Captain John Speller watches through the periscope as Kiev's propellers churn 10 feet above the lens, each blade a 6-meter shadow cutting through the Barents gloom. Swiftssure's helmsman calls depth creep. 7 feet to the carrier's hull now, the collision margin closing with every second. 42,000 tons of Soviet carrier overhead. No room to dive. No room to drift. The periscope camera must capture 6 frames of those propellers. Blade pitch, shaft alignment, sonar dome. Data NATO needs to build detection libraries for every Atlantic patrol. One miscalculation, and the periscope strikes steel, alerting the entire battle group. The photographer adjusts exposure, hands steady, waiting for the light to cooperate. Above, Kiev's wake churns white. Below, Swiftsure holds depth by will and math, suspended in an 8-meter window between intelligence coup and catastrophic collision. Earlier that morning, at periscope depth 70 miles northwest, Captain Speller received his orders. Locate the carrier Kiev during Soviet exercise Sever 77, record her acoustic signature, and photograph hull and propellers. NATO's submarine command needed this data to train sonar operators across the Atlantic. Every future encounter with a Kiev-class carrier depended on building a detection library now. Swiftsure had 2 days on station, 48 hours of fuel and reactor coolant before the boat had to withdraw. The mission was simple on paper. Find a 42,000-ton carrier surrounded by destroyers and frigates, slip beneath her, take pictures in near-total darkness, and escape undetected. Speller folded the message flimsy and passed it to his executive officer. The crew had done this before, shadowing Soviet battle groups in the Norwegian Sea. But never this close. Never directly underneath. Swiftssure's sonar operator, headphones clamped tight, identifies the battle group at 18 nautical miles. 1 carrier, 4 Cresta II cruisers, 1 Kashin destroyer. Scattered across a 10-mile circle of Barents water. The operator logs each propeller signature, blade count, shaft rotation rate, reactor coolant pump frequency, and plots bearings on the chart. Kiev's signature is distinct. Twin screws, high blade count, a low thrumming that carries for miles. The cruisers form a loose ring around her, their active sonar pinging every 90 seconds. Swiftsure is outside the detection envelope, for now, listening passively, building a picture of the Soviet formation from sound alone. The sonar operator marks the carrier's position with a grease pencil and calls the bearing to Captain Speller. 18 miles. Close enough to start the approach, far enough to stay invisible. The crew runs the numbers. 2 days on station, 48 hours to close, photograph, and withdraw before reactor coolant temperature limits force them to surface or risk scram. Swiftsure carries no external fuel tanks, no backup propulsion. Every mile covered at high speed burns reactor margin. Every hour spent creeping through the escort screen eats into the return window. The navigator plots the distance. 18 miles to close, 3 hours minimum at approach speed, 90 minutes for photography and withdrawal maneuvering, then a high-speed sprint back to international waters. It fits, but barely. 1 extended delay, a sonar contact requiring a detour, a frigate forcing them deep, and the fuel math collapses. Captain Speller approves the plan. The clock starts now. Swiftsure slows to 4 knots and descends to 150 meters, below the Soviet frigate's thermocline layer, but shallow enough to rise quickly if a contact closes. The thermocline, a temperature boundary where cold deep water meets warmer surface layers, bends sonar waves downward, creating an acoustic shadow zone. Soviet active sonar pinging from above cannot penetrate that layer easily. Swiftsure can hide there, listening passively, tracking the carrier group without revealing her position. But rising through the thermocline generates a temperature wake, a thermal scar in the water that lingers for 12 minutes and shows up on infrared sensors if Kiev's helicopters are scanning. The diving officer trims ballast and holds depth within 1 meter, minimizing flow noise. The boat settles into silent routine, reactor at minimum output, crew moving carefully to avoid rattling gear. They are invisible now, but only if they stay disciplined. The first Soviet active sonar ping sweeps overhead, a sharp, high-frequency pulse that washes over Swiftssure's hull and reflects back to the frigate. 360 degrees of coverage, every 90 seconds another pulse. The frigates are running overlapping search patterns, each sonar cone covering a 5-mile radius. Where two cones intersect, the Soviets can triangulate a contact's exact position within 50 meters. That triggers immediate torpedo response. Swiftssure's sonar operator logs the ping interval, 90 seconds, consistent. He marks the frigate positions on the plot. 4 contacts within detection range, their ping cycles staggered by 20 seconds. That creates narrow windows, 80 seconds to move between sweeps, 10 seconds of safety margin if two beams converge. Captain Speller studies the plot. Threading those windows will require perfect timing. One mistake, and they cross two beams at once. Then the entire battle group knows exactly where they are. Swiftssure's navigator plots the frigate screen on the chart table. Each escort pings every 90 seconds, creating overlapping detection cones. Crossing two beams simultaneously gives the Soviets an exact fix: latitude, longitude, depth, within 50 meters. That accuracy is enough for a depth charge run. The navigator draws arcs on the plot, marking safe zones where only one beam sweeps at a time. The gaps are narrow, shifting as the frigates maneuver. Swiftsure must advance through those gaps, freezing in place as each ping cycle completes, then sprinting 400 meters before the next sweep. It is a three-dimensional maze with moving walls. One miscalculation and they step into simultaneous illumination. Captain Speller examines the plot and nods. The path exists, but it will take hours to thread. The sonar operator reports 12 distinct propeller signatures within 5 nautical miles. 4 Cresta cruisers, 8 smaller escorts, Kiev herself. Each signature is a unique acoustic fingerprint: blade count, rotation speed, bearing tolerances. But Soviet machinery noise mirrors Swiftssure's own reactor coolant pumps. Both navies run pressurized water reactors. Both generate low-frequency thrumming at similar harmonics. Passive sonar alone cannot always distinguish friend from foe when the signatures overlap. The operator must cross-reference bearing with known contact positions, correlate propeller noise with visual periscope fixes taken hours earlier. A misidentified signature means surfacing into a frigate's path, thinking the corridor is clear when it is not. The operator logs each contact methodically, updating the plot every 2 minutes. 12 propellers. 12 chances to make a fatal mistake. Captain Speller examines the periscope depth calculation with his executive officer. Kiev's waterline draft is 10 meters. The periscope head extends 3 meters above Swiftssure's hull. That leaves 5 meters of clearance if both vessels hold steady. But the Barents Sea runs a 2-meter swell. A wave trough drops Kiev's keel lower. A wave crest lifts Swiftsure higher. Suddenly, the clearance is 3 meters, then 2. One large swell, and the periscope strikes the carrier's hull. The impact alerts the entire battle group. Escorts converge, depth charges follow. The executive officer suggests waiting for calmer seas. Speller shakes his head. The fuel clock is running. They have one window, maybe 90 seconds beneath the carrier, to capture the photographs. He orders the diving officer to hold depth within half a meter. No drift, no error. The math allows 8 meters of total clearance if everything goes perfectly. But the sea does not cooperate with math. The intelligence photographer briefs the captain on the camera system. Underwater cameras in 1977 require natural light. No flash. Flash would illuminate the entire underside of the carrier and alert lookouts above. The Barents Sea at 15 meters depth offers less than 2% of surface illumination. Red wavelengths vanish at 10 meters. Blue light penetrates deeper but scatters in the turbid water. The photographer must set exposure to 1/15 of a second at f2.8, slow enough to capture the dim propeller blades, but long enough to risk motion blur if Swiftsure drifts even 20 centimeters during the shot. He has 6 frames, 6 chances to record blade pitch, shaft alignment, hull sonar dome. If the images are too dark or too blurred, NATO cannot use them. The mission fails. The photographer tests the camera housing one more time, checking seals and focus. He will get one attempt. The light will barely cooperate. Timing becomes the final constraint. Swiftsure must close the distance between sonar pings, rise to periscope depth beneath Kiev without active sonar giving away her position, photograph in near darkness, and drop away before the next sweep cycle. 90 seconds total. The navigator breaks it into phases. 20 seconds to rise from 100 meters to periscope depth. 40 seconds to stabilize and photograph. 20 seconds to emergency dive back to safety. 10-second buffer for the unexpected. No room to extend. If Kiev maneuvers during that window, if a frigate ping arrives early, if the camera jams, Swiftsure will be caught at periscope depth, exposed and immobile. Captain Speller reviews the timeline one final time. 90 seconds. The crew has rehearsed each phase. Now they must execute it beneath 42,000 tons of moving steel, surrounded by a battle group trained to kill submarines. He gives the order to begin the approach. Swiftsure spends 3 hours creeping through the frigate screen. The boat advances 400 meters during each 80-second gap between sonar pulses, then freezes in place as the next ping sweeps overhead. The helmsman throttles the reactor to minimum output, propeller turning just fast enough to maintain steerage. The diving officer holds depth within 1 meter, adjusting trim tanks continuously to compensate for current and thermal shifts. Every 12 minutes, the sonar operator calls a bearing update, confirming that no frigate has changed course into their path. The crew moves in slow motion, every hatch sealed, every footstep deliberate. 3 hours to cover 6 nautical miles. Progress measured in boat lengths. The frigates never detect them. Swiftsure slips through the detection cones like a shadow, patient and invisible, closing the distance to Kiev one increment at a time. The sonar operator calls bearing changes every 12 minutes, building a precise track of Kiev's movement. Bearing 340, speed 12 knots, propeller signature consistent, reactor coolant flow audible at 4,200 meters. He cross-references the acoustic data with the navigator's plot. Kiev is holding course, running a straight line through the exercise area. Her escorts maintain station around her, frigates in a loose diamond formation, 2 cruisers trailing astern. The operator logs each update in grease pencil, refining the carrier's predicted position. At 1,200 meters, Swiftsure is close enough to hear machinery noise, ventilation fans, hydraulic pumps, the low hum of turbine generators feeding electrical systems. Kiev is a floating city, radiating sound. The operator marks the final bearing. Captain Speller orders speed match. Time to close the last gap. Captain Speller orders speed match. Swiftsure closes to 1,200 meters directly astern of Kiev, throttling reactor output to minimize cavitation noise. The submarine rides in the carrier's acoustic shadow, the turbulent wake where sonar cannot penetrate. Kiev's propellers churn water into a wall of noise and bubbles, masking Swiftshure's presence from the escorts ahead. But the shadow is a narrow corridor, only as wide as the carrier's beam. Drift left or right, and Swiftsure appears on a frigate's sonar. The helmsman maintains station, matching Kiev's 12-knot speed exactly, adjusting course every 30 seconds to stay centered in the wake. The sonar operator confirms they are invisible. No active pings penetrating the turbulence. No change in escort behavior. Swiftsure has become part of Kiev's own noise signature, indistinguishable from the carrier's wake. They are hidden in plain sound. At 600 meters, Captain Speller gives the order, rise to periscope depth, ascent rate 1 meter every 15 seconds. The diving officer opens ballast valves incrementally, venting compressed air in controlled bursts to avoid noise. Rising too fast generates a thermal wake, a temperature scar in the water visible to infrared sensors if Kiev's helicopters are scanning overhead. 15 seconds per meter keeps the disturbance minimal, blending into the natural thermocline fluctuations. The depth gauge needle climbs. 120 meters? 100? 80? The sonar operator listens for any change in the escort pattern, Any indication that Swiftsure has been detected? Nothing. Kiev's propeller noise grows louder, a rhythmic churning that shakes the hull. 60 meters? 40? The diving officer calls each depth increment. 20 meters? Periscope depth. The ascent has taken 12 minutes. Now they are committed. No turning back. The periscope breaks into the narrow water column 10 feet beneath Kiev's hull. The crew can hear the carrier's propellers churning overhead, a wall of sound that drowns out all other noise. The photographer raises the periscope camera, locking focus on the twin screws. Each blade is 6 meters across, spinning in a blur even at 12 knots. The hull above is a dark ceiling, sonar dome visible as a rounded bulge forward of the propellers. Swiftsure is suspended in a slot of water barely wider than the boat herself, hemmed in by the carrier above and the ocean floor 80 meters below. The helmsman reports depth fluctuation. Carrier wake turbulence pushes the submarine down 2 meters, then up 3. The periscope head is now 7 feet from Kiev's hull. One more surge, and they collide. The photographer steadies the camera. This is the moment. 6 frames to capture everything NATO needs. Passive sonar detects motion by listening for cavitation. Propeller blades spinning faster than 8 knots create vacuum bubbles on the low-pressure side of each blade. Those bubbles implode microseconds later, generating shock waves at 100 to 300 hertz. That frequency travels hundreds of miles through deep ocean sound channels, a persistent acoustic signature that reveals a submarine's position long before visual contact. Swiftssure's propeller is designed to delay cavitation onset, blade geometry optimized to maintain smooth flow up to 12 knots. But any damage, any fouling from biological growth, shifts the threshold lower. The sonar operator monitors their own propeller noise continuously, listening for the telltale crackle of cavitation that would betray them to the Soviet escorts. So far, smooth flow. No bubbles, no betrayal. But the margin is thin. One extra knot of speed, and they light up every passive array within 10 miles. Soviet active sonar sends a 5 kHz pulse every 90 seconds. The wavefront spreads in a cone, reflecting off any solid object. Submarine hull, rock outcrop, school of fish. A single return gives bearing, but not range. 2 frigates pinging from different positions create triangulation geometry. The overlap zone fixes a contact's position to within 50 meters. That accuracy is sufficient for a torpedo launch. Swiftssure's crew must plot each frigate's position and predict when their ping cones will intersect. If the boat is caught in that intersection, even for one ping cycle, the Soviets have a firing solution. The navigator draws the geometry on the chart, overlapping circles, safe corridors threading between them. Each corridor is a narrow window in time and space. Enter early and they cross one beam. Enter late and they cross the other. Enter on time and they slip through unseen. Precision is not optional. It is survival. The thermocline at 100 meters depth is a boundary where cold, deep water meets warmer surface layers. Sound waves traveling through water refract at that boundary, bending downward into the cold layer like light through a prism. The result is an acoustic shadow zone, a volume of water where sonar pulses from above cannot penetrate. Swiftsure hides in that zone, invisible to Soviet frigates pinging from the surface. But rising through the thermocline disturbs the temperature gradient. The ascending submarine drags warm water down and pushes cold water up, creating a thermal wake that persists for 12 minutes. That wake shows up on infrared sensors as a temperature anomaly, visible to helicopters equipped with thermal imaging. The diving officer must balance 2 threats: stay below the thermocline and remain acoustically invisible, or rise through it and risk thermal detection. Timing the ascent to coincide with Kiev's own wake turbulence masks the thermal scar in the larger disturbance. It is a calculated gamble, hiding one signature inside another. Periscope depth clearance is calculated in real time. Kiev's waterline draft is 10 meters. Swiftssure's periscope head extends 3 meters above the hull. That leaves 5 meters of clearance if both vessels hold steady in calm water. But the Barents Sea runs a 2-meter swell. A wave trough drops Kiev's keel lower by up to 1 meter. A wave crest lifts Swiftsure higher by another meter. The clearance shrinks to 3 meters, then 2. The diving officer monitors depth using pressure sensors accurate to 0.1 meter, adjusting ballast continuously to hold position. But carrier wake turbulence adds a chaotic element. Downward pulses from the propeller wash push the submarine deeper, then upward surges lift her higher. The diving officer compensates by feel, watching the depth gauge needle flutter and countering each surge with a ballast adjustment. The mathematics are simple, the execution is not. One misjudged surge and the periscope strikes 42,000 tons of moving steel. Underwater photography in 1977 is constrained by physics. Red wavelengths are absorbed within 10 meters of the surface. Orange and yellow vanish by 20 meters. Blue light penetrates deepest, but Barents Sea turbidity scatters even blue wavelengths, reducing contrast. At 15 meters depth, less than 2% of surface illumination reaches the camera sensor. The photographer compensates with a slow shutter speed, 1/15 of a second, and a wide aperture of f2.8 to gather maximum light. But slow shutter means motion blur. If Swiftsure drifts 20 centimeters during the exposure, the propeller blades smear into useless streaks. The photographer must time each shot between wake surges when the boat is momentarily stable. 6 frames, 6 exposures, each one a gamble that the light will cooperate and the boat will hold still long enough. NATO intelligence depends on sharp images showing blade pitch and shaft alignment. Blurred photos are worthless. The photographer braces the camera and waits for the moment between surges. The periscope camera locks focus on Kiev's twin propellers, each blade 6 meters across, churning 10 feet above the lens. The photographer triggers the shutter. Frame 1, port propeller, blade pitch visible. Frame 2, starboard propeller, shaft alignment clear. Frame 3, rudder assembly, hydraulic rams visible. Frame 4, hull sonar dome, transducer array resolved. Frame 5, waterline joint, weld seams sharp. Frame 6, aft stabilizer, control surface angle captured. 6 exposures in 40 seconds, each frame a piece of the intelligence puzzle. The photographer lowers the camera and reports to the captain. Images captured, quality uncertain until developed. NATO analysts will examine every pixel, measuring blade geometry, counting rivets, cataloging details that reveal Kiev's acoustic signature and handling characteristics. If the photos are sharp, the mission succeeds. If they are blurred, the risk was for nothing. The captain orders emergency dive. Time to leave. Swiftssure's helmsman reports depth fluctuation. Carrier wake turbulence pushes the submarine down 2 meters, then lifts her up 3. The periscope head is now 7 feet from Kiev's hull. The diving officer adjusts ballast, flooding tanks to counter the upward surge. But the next pulse comes faster than expected. A chaotic eddy in the wake slams the submarine upward. 6 feet to collision. 5. The diving officer floods emergency ballast, forcing the bow down. The depth gauge needle swings wildly. 4 feet. The captain orders full emergency dive. Compressed air vents into ballast tanks, displacing water, driving the boat down. The periscope retracts automatically as depth increases. 3 feet. 2. Then the submarine drops, falling away from the hull, descending into safer water. 60 meters. 80. The collision averted by seconds and reflex. At 60 meters depth, the sonar operator detects a bearing change. Kiev is turning 10 degrees to port, adjusting course for the next phase of the exercise. Her propeller wash swings directly toward Swiftssure's position, a wall of turbulent water accelerating toward the submarine. The helmsman feels the surge through the hull, pressure wave hitting from starboard, pushing the boat sideways. Captain Speller orders immediate course correction. Swiftsure swings to port, aligning with Kiev's new heading, staying in the acoustic shadow. But the turn exposes the submarine's beam to the nearest frigate's sonar. The sonar operator listens for a ping change, any indication the frigate has detected the maneuver. 10 seconds. 20. No change. The frigate maintains course. Swiftsure completes the turn and steadies on the new heading, once again invisible in Kiev's wake. The captain exhales. They are still undetected. But the margin was thin. At 80 meters depth, the sonar operator detects splashes ahead. 3 distinct impacts, then 6 more. Soviet Kamov helicopters are dropping sonobuoys in a grid pattern, each buoy a miniature passive sonar array suspended on a hydrophone cable. The buoys activate within 60 seconds, forming a detection net across Swiftssure's planned escape route. Each sonobuoy listens for propeller noise, machinery hum, flow noise over the hull. If Swiftsure passes within 3 miles of an active buoy at speed, cavitation noise will light up the grid. The navigator plots the splash positions on the chart. A 3-mile grid, 12 buoys, gaps barely wide enough for the submarine to thread. Captain Speller orders speed reduction to 3 knots, maximum speed that avoids propeller cavitation. At 3 knots, Swiftsure generates minimal noise, indistinguishable from ocean background. But 3 knots means a 4-hour withdrawal. 4 hours threading a detection net with 0 margin for error. Swiftsure creeps west at 3 knots. The sonar operator calls sonobuoy positions every 8 minutes as the grid tightens. Buoys deployed ahead now activate, hydrophones listening for any acoustic anomaly. The navigator calculates safe corridors between buoys, narrow lanes where detection cones do not overlap. The crew moves in absolute silence. Hatches secured, equipment lashed. No one speaks above a whisper. The helmsman holds course with micrometer precision, adjusting rudder angle by fractions of a degree to stay centered in the corridor. The sonar operator listens to their own machinery noise, confirming it remains below the acoustic threshold. Reactor coolant pumps barely audible, propeller silent, flow noise minimal. They are a ghost in the water, slipping between detection zones by discipline and calculation. 3 knots, 4 hours, every minute an eternity. Every corridor a gamble that the Soviets have not deployed an extra buoy undetected. At 18 nautical miles from the Soviet screen, the sonobuoy splashes stop. No new deployments. The detection net does not extend farther west. Captain Speller orders descent to 200 meters and acceleration to 12 knots. Swiftsure drops below the thermocline and opens throttle. Propeller cavitation now irrelevant at this range. The boat surges forward, leaving the Barents Sea exercise area behind. The crew maintains silent routine for another 2 hours, clearing the Soviet patrol aircraft range before transitioning to normal operations. At the 12-hour mark, Swiftsure surfaces briefly to transmit a coded message to UK Submarine Command. Mission complete. Photographs captured. No detection. Returning to base. The radio operator encrypts the message and sends a 3-second burst transmission. Then, the boat dives again and sets course for home waters. The Cold War's closest underwater approach to a Soviet capital ship is over. The crew will not speak of it for decades. The 6 Periscope photographs, though blurred by low light and motion, reveal critical details when analyzed at NATO intelligence headquarters. Kiev's propeller blade count, 6 per shaft. Blade pitch angle, 22 degrees, optimized for 12-knot cruise speed. Hull-mounted sonar configuration, bow-mounted active array, flank-mounted passive hydrophones. The images provide enough data for analysts to generate an acoustic signature profile. At speeds above 15 knots, Kiev's propellers create a distinct 127 Hz cavitation tone, a frequency fingerprint exploitable by Western passive sonar arrays across the Atlantic. That signature is cataloged in NATO's recognition library, distributed to SOSUS stations and carrier battle group sonar teams. From this point forward, any Kiev-class carrier operating in the North Atlantic can be identified and tracked by that single tonal signature. The intelligence product justifies the risk. The Kiev acoustic signature becomes a training standard. SOSUS operators across the Atlantic practice identifying the 127 Hz tone among ocean background noise. NATO carrier battle groups receive briefings on Soviet hunter-killer tactics, informed by the propeller geometry and maneuverability data extracted from Swiftshure's photographs. Detection algorithms are refined to prioritize that specific frequency, reducing false positive rates and improving contact classification speed. The operational impact is measurable. Western passive sonar arrays can now distinguish Kiev-class carriers from other Soviet surface groups at ranges exceeding 100 nautical miles, providing carrier battle group commanders with early warning and maneuvering time. The intelligence gathered in 90 seconds beneath the Barents Sea shapes anti-submarine warfare doctrine for the next decade. Swiftshure's mission demonstrates that Cold War undersea operations prioritize stealth, acoustic discipline, and intelligence gathering over firepower, a template for future missions that would remain classified until long after the Soviet Union dissolved. The operation remains classified until 2013. Swiftsure returns to UK waters, the crew debriefed under secrecy protocols, the photographs archived in restricted intelligence vaults. Captain Speller and his officers move on to other assignments, carrying the memory of 90 seconds beneath Kiev in silence. When the mission is finally declassified, retired submariners describe it as the Cold War's closest approach to a capital ship under conditions mirroring wartime rules of engagement. The operation required threading active sonar grids, photographing propellers in near-total darkness, and escaping through helicopter-laid sonobuoy fields, tradecraft that defined undersea intelligence gathering in an era when acoustic stealth mattered more than torpedoes. Swiftsure served until 1992, decommissioned after the Cold War ended. The photographs she captured beneath Kiev remain in NATO archives, a testament to the precision and discipline required to gather intelligence inches from disaster.